focus, intensity, and novelty, right? When you have all three of those neurotransmitters, all those chemicals are at max capacity for you are forging lessons.
For people who feel lazy and low energy levels right now, I feel like that is sort of like a silent pandemic in and of itself. What are some things that people can start doing today to turn things around?
Oh, wow. That's a big one right out of the gate. But I would say this. I mean,
if you're like low motivation, if you're feeling uninspired, we live in weird times, anxiety provoking times. What can people do to turn things around?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would always recommend is something that guys like we as in SEAL team guys would do in times of deep uncertainty, and that's just ask a very basic question. That's what can I control in this moment? Our brains are question answering machines, and we kind of don't realize this, but I mean that's the way our brains interrogate the world constantly. It's asking questions about what we're seeing and going into our occipital lobe, going through the Dewey Decimal System. Have I seen this before? Then going to the hippocampus and asking if there's experiences can be related to it. So it's always interrogating the world that way. What we don't realize is that our conscious minds act the same way. Whenever we deliberately place a question into our conscious mind, our brain has no choice but to give us answers to that question. So I do this experiment with groups sometimes when I do workshops. I say, okay, I'm going to give you 30 seconds and I'm going to ask you this question. How could I double my income in the next 30 days? I want you to ask that question, and I'm going to give you 30 seconds. Write down anything that pops into your head, right? And I give them 30 seconds, and they're scribbling, and I say, okay, I don't care about the answers. Just count how many answers you got. And usually it's the numbers between 2 and 5 or 7, right? Things they write down. And I tell them, the reason why I do that is not because of the question. The reason is because it's giving an example of our neurology. When we place a question into our brains immediately begin to answer it. The problem is a lot of us do this without thinking about it. And we do it the wrong way. We ask questions like, what's wrong with me? Why am I so bad at this? Why is everybody out to get me? Right? As soon as we ask those questions, we start getting answers, and we're not going to like those answers. Those answers aren't very inspiring or motivating. And so, I mean, every single high performer or high performing team I've ever encountered, high performing human or high performing team, takes conscious control of the questions they ask themselves on a consistent basis. They ask better questions. They ask things like, how can I do better at this? How can I motivate myself? How can I get going? Who's out there that can help me? Right? You ask those questions, and some answers will start to matriculate into your brain. And the key is not to let yourself off the hook, because you're going to have a couple answers at the ready. You're going to throw out a couple, but you have to say, okay, what else? And just challenge yourself. I am a true believer, and I learned this trick back in high school, this question trick. I'm a true believer that the quality of our lives is directly proportional to the quality of questions we ask ourselves on a consistent basis, right? If we ask ourselves quality questions consistently, we will get quality answers, and the direction of our lives and the vector will be completely different. And so, if you're feeling unmotivated, if you're feeling down, if you're feeling like there's not a lot going on, start looking at the questions you're asking yourself and come up with better ones. And by the way, I'll just end with this, because people always ask, hey, Rich, what are some good questions to ask? But I can't answer that, because that's a subjective thing. It depends on the person. But in a pinch, if you don't know the question to ask yourself this question: what is a better question right now? Right? And you will begin to come up with better questions. My wife and I were doing this in the pandemic when we were all quarantined, and we'd go for walks around the neighborhood with our dog, and sometimes we'd be pretty low, and we'd use the first lap to vent, and then the second lap we'd be like, okay, stop. This is not productive. What is a better question we should be asking ourselves right now? And we'd start to come up with better questions, and from those better questions, we'd get better answers. And so I'd say if you're low, start looking at the quality of questions you're asking yourself.
Sounds like a wonderful exercise to do with a significant other. That sounds like a really vulnerable thing to, and something that could really help bring you closer.
Yeah, I would. That's a great point, because I'd say in a really good relationship, I think this is probably automatic. I mean, I know my wife and I just passed our 20-year anniversary.
Mazel tov.
Yeah, thank you. And that's serious business, because she married me 5 years into my SEAL career, and she was with me the whole war, right? So she's a strong, powerful, wonderful woman. But I think one of the things we've often taken note of is the way we balance each other. When she's like down or feeling low or having issues, I tend to step up and kind of help her with better questions, right? And she does the same thing with me, right? And it's almost felt automatic, right? But as soon as we noticed that we were doing that, we're like, actually, this works out pretty well, And then sometimes we'll be down at the same time. We have to force ourselves to to just do it together. But yeah, it's a great relationship tool, I would say.
Would you write these down, these questions?
You can, yeah, you can. I mean, really, whatever works for you. I think if you are truly in a funk right now in your life, I would say sit down with a piece of paper and write down some better questions, and preferably do it, and then look at them. If you only come up with a few answers, do it right before you go to bed, because there's science behind the fact that the stuff you think about kind of sifts into your limbic system while you sleep, and your brain can churn on it, so you're likely to wake up in the morning with some new ideas, or you wake up in the middle of the night with an idea and you just write it down. but yeah, I would say writing it down if you're really in a funk. I always recommend writing wherever possible, but you don't have to. You can do. I mean, someone can do this in traffic if they're frustrated, right? Because in traffic you can be sitting there frustrated, like you can start spinning on stupid stuff, right? You could kind of say instead, hey, what's a better question? Like, what can I be happy? Here's a great question, by the way. What can I be grateful for right now? Because gratitude is a very, very powerful emotion. I mean, the neurotransmitters, the chemicals that we release when we're truly grateful, I mean, are just insanely good for us. And so just asking what can I be grateful for? It's hard to be depressed when you're in a state of gratitude. So
you're right. And everybody has something that they can be grateful for.
I mean, if you're alive and breathing, I would imagine yes.
Absolutely.
I mean, yeah. I mean, Viktor Frankl wrote a great book, A Man's Search for Meaning, about his time in concentration camps in Nazi Germany. I mean, one of the best books written. He talks about this and talks about reframing and talks about just making the most of a situation, and it's all done based on how you frame it, how you ask questions about it, and what you're grateful for. And it's just if a guy like that can do it, man. A lot of us who have, lesser problems can do it.
Oh my God. I mean, if you're in a concentration camp and you're able to find something to be grateful for.
Yeah.
And that means, whoever's listening to this can do the same.
Oh yeah, totally. No kidding. I mean, you can get over the funk. And of course, I'm not going to assume, anybody's problems. There are certainly some big ones, but again, just know that our brains are designed to do that. We can access and kind of take max advantage of our neurology.
I love that because, today there's just, I think people have come to accept chronic stress in many ways as normal, whether it's the panic porn that the media really loves to pervade, or the fact that, yes, we're still we're very much still within the pandemic, although I feel like I do have a sense that there is a light at the end of the tunnel, which I'm very grateful for. A lot of people have economic hardship, but also there's relationship stuff. There's, there's any number of things that that can serve as stressful stimuli in somebody's life. So this is really useful information. And I feel like you could also take these questions and kind of break them out. Like you can meditate on the questions that are going to serve you best in the more immediate time frame, but then also in the longer time frame. Like what are my goals?
Totally. Yeah, totally.
A year from now, 5 years from now, what are my goals for the goals for my family, the goals for my retirement, et cetera.
Well, I think, but it has to kind of be taken in steps, right? I mean, the near term stuff, the stuff that's in front of our face affects our emotions, and our emotions are clues into what's happening in our bodies physiologically, right? When we're angry, when we're depressed, when we're down and out, when we're feeling those emotions, we're generating cortisol. In some cases, it's a cortisol mixed with adrenaline, like in the anger case. Sometimes it's a cortisol mixed with acetylcholine, which is like depression. But cortisol, again, a necessary chemical to get us moving, right? But if it's in our systems for too long, it's hard on our system. It does some damage, right? So our bodies were designed, our nervous system was designed to go from sympathetic, which is that cortisol response, to parasympathetic, which is the rest and digest, the repair system. Well, parasympathetic system and those positive emotions start generating things like DHEA, which is the building block for testosterone and estrogen, oxytocin, things like that. Right? So our emotions, depending on where our emotions lie, can clue us into how our physiology is working. If we deliberately try to shift states into gratitude, into joy, into peacefulness, right? We will be shifting our neurophysiology as well, right? And we will begin to repair our system. This can be done by questions. This can be done by visualization. But the key is the emotions. Here, a really quick hack into this is laughing, by the way. And we didn't get into humor last time we talked, but it's one of the attributes I talk about in the book, and the power of laughter. People don't recognize the fact that when we laugh, first of all, it's involuntary. And second of all, when it happens, we get juiced with 3 very powerful chemicals, 2 neurotransmitters and 1 hormone, right? We get the neurotransmitter dopamine, which we all know about. I mean, it's a feel-good chemical. Keep doing this. This is good. It's almost a hack into courage, because we talked about, I know last time we talked about courage. When we step into our fear, we get a dopamine reward. It's the human body's reward system. Very powerful chemical. So we get dopamine. We get endorphins, which is designed to mask our physical pain, right? It was the late 60s or early 70s. Scientists were studying drug addiction and how human bodies reacted to it. And they discovered that the human brain had opiate receptors. And they were kind of like, well, why the heck do human brains have opiate receptors? Well, the answer is because we make our own opiates. Those opiates are endorphins, right? Endorphins designed to mask our pain, because we were designed as endurance creatures, right? We were designed to go for the long haul, the long hunt, go for a long time to find food and shelter. So we needed chemicals to kind of help us do that. Runner's high, people who work out and have runner's high, that's endorphin. So you get dopamine, you get endorphins, and then you get it's not a neurotransmitter, it's a hormone. It's just a faster acting hormone of oxytocin. Oxytocin, known as the love hormone, right? It binds us and it's the bonding chemical. So, I mean, we experience oxytocin bursts when we engage in physical touch with other human beings or even animals. When we acts of generosity or acts of kindness, right? Even when we engage them, even when we observe them, right? When we observe an act of generosity or kindness, we get a burst of oxytocin. This is why it feels so good when you watch we watch nice things on the news, right, as opposed to bad things, right? So anyway, all that to say, when you laugh, you get all 3 of those all at once, right? I mean, so it's why laughter is quite literally the best medicine, because it's juicing you with all these chemicals. It can take you out of a funk. It can take you into a courageous state. It can make you feel less pain, right? Cancer survivors, a lot of them are, all say, or many of them say, hey, I decided during this treatment, I'd laugh as much as possible. They juiced themselves with as many things that were funny as possible. So yeah, I mean, if you are really down, go find something to laugh about, right? Because that'll pick you up, not only emotionally, but neurobiologically as well. So it's
amazing. And there's so many options available to people now, right? Like obviously we have streaming services. I just watched the latest Dave Chappelle special on Netflix, which I loved. There's, comedy podcasts. So, I mean, really, these are incredibly powerful and thankfully very entertaining tools that people have at their fingertips.
Yeah. We got to honor our class clowns, and our comedians. They are doing us a very big service in making us laugh. And any friends you have that can help you laugh. This is what people ask me what I miss most about the SEAL teams. And I don't use the word miss, because that typically implies longing, right? But I look back fondly upon the most are those times when we were in I mean, we were just in the worst situations and we were laughing so hard we were crying. I mean, because it was inevitable that someone would make a joke. I mean, you almost train yourself to just, when things get really bad, you have to joke about it because it's like, oh my God, I can't believe this is so bad. We have to laugh, right? So yeah, I missed that quite a bit because it was just a natural cue in terms of our pack there.
I love that. I mean, one thing that I'm getting from this conversation that I think is so true is that it can be difficult to think your way into a new state, into a new mood, but it's much easier to act your way into a state change.
Yeah.
You know, whether it's like something as simple as writing down things, or even just, you know, thinking about the things that you can be grateful for, or putting on a comedy podcast. But personally, for me, whenever I'm feeling lazy or unmotivated, three things actually really help me. I force myself to go to the gym, and I recognize that, you know, even a shitty workout is better than no workout.
Yep.
So I force myself to go to the gym, and I'm a different person leaving the gym than I was walking into it. Saunas are a wonderful tool for me, but even probably more so than saunas, cold water immersion.
Oh yeah. Love that.
Are you familiar with any of those modalities, like the science behind any of those modalities? And can you speak to them?
I can speak to them in somewhat layman's terms. Yes. I mean, I have in my garage, I have an ice chest that I fill with water and keep it about 32 degrees. So I jump in that, you know, frequently. My son does it now too. So, I mean, cold water immersion, I mean, it's designed to ramp up all of your systems. It's a sympathetic response, of course, but it's you're releasing a bunch of hugely powerful hormones and transmitters when you're going through that. I would say that it's not for everybody, or at least to just know that it's not, you know, guys like us, I think, and people who've done it now understand that there's pleasure behind the pain. Okay. But it is painful getting in, no doubt. But yeah, the cold water therapy, I think the saunas do the same thing, just in the reverse, you know, for heat. I would say though, for people who are not interested or can't go to that extreme, it's kind of like you said, some people might not even be able to go to the gym, right? But get up and going for a walk. I mean, just going outside and breathing fresh air. Take off your mask because you don't need it outside, right? And breathe fresh air. I mean, it's so for example, going to the beach, for example, and just sitting on the beach, which is one of the reasons why I love being on the coast. But this works in any area where you can get to an open horizon. Okay. It's been scientifically proven that open gaze, you know, which is your ability to kind of stare out in front of you and not focus on anything. So you're kind of noticing your peripheries. That's open gaze. It's a soft gaze, right? That has been proven to shift our systems into parasympathetic, right? Off of sympathetic into parasympathetic, which means it's calming us down, right? Wow. This is because when we're stressed, we tend to focus in on the threat, right? So focus becomes really dialed in with tunnel vision when we're stressed. So to deliberately open gaze makes us more relaxed. This is exactly why people who live in either on the coast or in areas where they have access to big horizons tend to be more relaxed, right? Mm-hmm. Versus people who live in the inner, you know, in the city where there's buildings that tend to be less relaxed, right? So even just moving, getting outside and getting your eyes onto an open horizon, those are things that are going to make you feel better, and it's going to be kind of accessing your physiology in ways that you might not have accessed before. So you're right. I mean, get movement and visual tools, getting movement, you know, getting in there, getting our brains, you know, thinking. But even like a good song, music can shift our states, you know, as well. So I mean, we should all have at least a set of 5 or 10 songs that when we hear it, we're like, man, I just feel good. You know, those are great ways to do it. So I would say to those people, just ask some better questions, do some diligence on asking yourself, what are some triggers that you can pull out of your repertoire? There are some things in your repertoire that you can pull out and access almost on demand that will make you feel better in the moment, you know? And then once you're feeling better, you're better state in the moment, then you're way better prepared to start doing what you're saying and making those long-term goals and saying, okay, now as I look out in the next 6 months or a year or 5 years, where do I want to be? And write those down.
I love that. Music is it's a totally subjective thing, but I have to ask, what are 3 songs that you might put on when you're stressed out?
Well, ironically, people are going to think this is funny, but Metallica is one of my favorite. I mean, is one of my most favorite bands. And so like the music off of like And Justice for All or Master of Puppets, which some people would be like find very angry or irritating, really calm me in a way that's, because I just love the precision of it. It's just so I'm a big fan of what I call precision aggression, when it's just like really fast and precise. I think this is one of the reasons why I enjoyed what I did in the SEAL teams, because the ability to kind of run into a room and take a shot so quickly and so precisely. I just love that. It was always you always shot one bullet at a time because you had intent behind every single bullet, right? Well, it's almost like I feel the same thing when I'm listening to a Metallica song, because every single guitar chug is like intentional, right? So that makes me feel it just, I don't know. It's just something I like, I think soundtracks are great. I think you and I joked about last time we talked about the Dark Knight trilogy and the soundtrack, right?
So good.
And I think one of the some of those scores, I mean, I just put those on and you just feel, you just feel like on top of the world, right?
Well, it makes you feel like a superhero. Literally.
Totally. So I think those. I think the Man of Steel soundtrack is awesome for that. I mean, so again, it's subjective. So you got to pull into your own bag of tricks and figure out what works for you. For some people, Metallica might feel. My younger son's funny. I listen to Metallica with him. He's like, Dad, this is like stressing me out. I was like, okay, well, I'll stop it, right? But he likes. I mean, he loves like he plays the banjo, which I love. I mean, because I love that type of music too. But my younger son plays the banjo, so he just likes that different style of music, which is cool. So yeah, it's highly subjective.
That is amazing. Yeah, I like. I'm a bit of a rock head myself too. So when I'm like, stressed out, I put on like my favorite band is Muse, or they're one of my favorite bands, and they go pretty hard, but just it lifts my mood like no other.
Yeah.
I love it. Movies are great, just because it gets you, when you're immersed in a good story, it takes you out of your head.
Right. This is where escapism actually works quite well. I mean, people, there's a lot of, some people badmouth escapism, right? I don't badmouth escapism necessarily. I just say don't do it too often, because if you do it too often, then you're going to be unproductive, right? But sometimes it's just getting out of your head that way and escaping into a different story is exactly what you need. And depending on the genres, you enjoy. I don't necessarily enjoy like drama, like dramatic stuff, because it doesn't take me into a nice escape. It doesn't make me feel good afterwards, right? So there was a lot of bad mouthing the Avengers, movies as their kind of theme parks, or there's like theatrical, like going to a theatrical theme park, and I was like, yes, absolutely, that's exactly why I go. I love it. Like I just love the theme parkness. It just made you feel good, right? So yeah, it's classic escapism. So
yeah, I love it. Moving on, you're a Navy SEAL, which I think is the coolest freaking thing ever. What does the morning routine of a Navy SEAL look like?
Oh, okay. Well, first of all, I'm a former Navy SEAL, which is entirely different than being an active Navy SEAL.
But isn't it once and always Navy SEAL, always a Navy SEAL, or no?
No, I mean, I don't think so. I think that it's funny. I've had this conversation with a couple of people, to include some of my buddies who are also retired. The Marines have a saying, once a Marine, always the Marine, right? And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. That's a cool saying. My brother's a Marine, right? So the SEALs are a little bit different. I kind of analyzed this with a couple of my buddies. In the SEAL teams, there's the saying is you earn your trident every day. The trident is the big gold pin that you get when you become a Navy SEAL. It's your SEAL designator. And the idea is that you earn your trident every day. And so once you leave, whether you get out of the teams or you retire, you're not really earning your trident every day. You've put it on the shelf, right? So I don't think, and again, I there are guys who are active right now doing the job. They are doing the hard work. I'm not doing it anymore. I'm proud to have done it. But I need to honor and respect those guys who are doing it. And I never want to be one of those folks who kind of keeps that as a thing. It's something I'm putting on the shelf and I'm honoring. And of course I'm using my credibility from that life to help me come up with some ideas for the book and other things I'm doing. But the idea is that it's on the shelf and I'm moving into a whole new facet. So anyway, that's a long answer to why I'm a former Navy SEAL, not a current one. But I would say, when you're active Navy SEAL, your routine can vary, but it typically is you're going to get up, you're going to go to work, you're going to PT, do some sort of heavy PT, and then you're going to go train, whether it's shooting or diving or whatever you need to do. It might be maintenance or whatever like that. So you try to train as much as you can, and rinse and repeat and do that over and over until you actually have to go somewhere and do it for real. As a former Navy SEAL, it also depends on the individual. It gets a little bit tougher. And so I love to work out. I try to work out, if on my good weeks and months, I'm working out 5 times a week, and mixing between, conditioning and strength training and even running and, stuff like that. But I have to say, Max, it's not as easy. I mean, when it's not a part of your job anymore, at least for me, it's a little bit tougher to do. So I still work on it. Where I know there are some guys who retire, they're diligent about it every day, but it's never out of my mind. I should say that. So
now, when you're in training, I'm imagining you have very early mornings. Is it?
It depends. I mean, again, the one of the things I love about the SEAL teams is we're always very practical. It's kind of like, if you don't need to get up early, then don't get up early. I mean, it's we would get up early. I mean, the earliest we would get up a lot of times was when we'd go out west to do skydiving, and we'd do like these, heinous skydives where you go out like 22,000 feet and things like that, and we'd get up really early, like 2 or 3 a.m. to do these jumps. A, because we wanted to get some nighttime training in, but B, because out there in the desert in Western United States, as soon as the temperature starts to warm up, you start to get dust devils, and dust devils are a night. I mean, they're like catastrophic when you're underneath a parachute. You do not want to get.
What's
a dust devil? Is basically it's basically a mini tornado, right? It's just a. If you're ever out in the desert like Nevada or Arizona, you might see swirls of dirt, right? These swirls of dust, kind of looking like a tornado. These things just rise up because of the temperatures, the temperature differential. So it's like a mini tornado, right? And you can imagine what a mini tornado will do to a parachute when you're under canopy. It's not good. So those things, a lot of times, those things would start to show up around 9 a.m. 9 or 10 a.m. And so we try to get all our jumps in before that. But other than that, yeah, it's just you get up. You usually get up at a reasonable hour. You train, and then if you needed to train at night, you just train late, and then sleep in the next morning. So yeah, there was never any. It was never like we do like the old Army thing. We do more before 9 a.m. than most people do all day or whatever. Sometimes that was the case, but sometimes it wasn't. So it was
wow. And are you fasted primarily, or what? I mean, what's your breakfast like in this?
It depends. I mean, I always prefer to be fasted. I would even when I was in the teams, I would almost eat nothing before going on missions. I just felt sharper if I didn't. That was completely dependent. A lot of guys would go have dinner before we'd go on missions. I wouldn't eat anything just because I always felt sharper if I didn't. And I think now and back then, I mean, you got to think I was a SEAL. I mean, from 1996 till 2016. So I mean, the whole intermittent fasting stuff wasn't as predominant in terms of the health and science as it is today, right? So my fasting was just because I don't feel like eating. I feel better because I'm not eating. Nowadays, I'm sure that guys are probably doing a little bit more scientific decisions based on when they eat and what they eat and how they fast. But again, you got to recognize. I mean, being a SEAL and doing operations. And I say, I don't know how much is going on now because there's really nothing going on now. But we were doing operations on a nightly basis, and you never, when you're going out on something like that, you never know how long it's going to last, right? So you don't prepare for these things the same way an athlete prepares. You're always managing your physiology for the long term. It's like, I don't know how long I'll be out there, when I'll need to be at 100%, when I'll need to dial it back. So this is kind of an energy management exercise that you really learn, even basic training when you're in buds. I mean, you're constantly grabbing recovery points where you can. I remember in SEAL training, buds, even in Hell Week, when you only sleep like 2 hours for the whole week, if you came in, they'd always have races, right? Boat races. And so if you came in like the first in first place, or sometimes second place, but you in first place, they'd say, hey, okay, you get to go put your boat over there and sit by your boat, okay, while you waited for the other people to finish, right? Well, if you ever got that chance, you'd sit down and you just fall asleep as fast as possible. and you might only be asleep for like 3 minutes, right? But it's still 3 minutes of sleep that you get, right? So I think it gets inculcated into your system that you try to find those breaks. And I remember, we'd be flying on the helicopter into missions, like to go insert on missions. And I'd look around the helicopter and some guys were sleeping. Some guys were just listening to music. Some guys were just chilling. There was never any of that like rah, fired up, let's get all, that doesn't happen, right? Because that uses too much energy. You're just like, hey, I'm going to keep it loose, keep it relaxed. As soon as I need to turn it up, I'll dial it up, but I'm not going to waste an ounce of energy if I don't have to. So I think that's kind of how most of us, certainly how I manage my life nowadays.
What does a Navy SEAL, a former Navy SEAL, do when that very common human emotion, laziness, arises, and you feel like procrastinating or not necessarily doing the things that you have to do? Like, what's the kind of self-talk that gets you through those moments?
So I think the first point of analysis. So it's always about analyzing what's going on, right? So the first point of analysis is, how often am I doing this? In other words, how often am I procrastinating? How often am I being lazy? If the answer is not very often, sometimes the right answer is, okay, I'm going to be lazy right now. I'm going to enjoy my ability to be lazy in this moment, right? This is called balance, right? Sometimes it's okay to be lazy. Sometimes it's okay to procrastinate. If you're consistently doing it, that's a problem, right? But I think the understanding of the ebb and flow of energy requirements is pretty necessary. I have been at points, where I'm sitting at my desk, I'm like, God, I don't feel like doing anything. I don't feel very creative. Okay, I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to walk away from my desk. I have the ability in this moment to not do anything. Now, if you don't have that ability, if you need to do something, then you just have to say, okay, suck it up, ask some better. It's kind of like you saying, no matter how hard it is, you just get to the gym. You just suck it up and do it. And just say, hey, procrastination is not an option in this moment. Laziness is not an option in this moment. So just get the job done. I think one of the advantages, and certainly something I'm grateful for, having been in the SEAL teams and learning this, I guess I probably had a little bit of it in my system already, was the kind of the ability to be very pragmatic about the whole thing, right? I'm whatever I need to do in this moment, I'm going to do. All right. That's, if it has to get done, I'm not going to worry about it. I'm not going to complain about it. I'm just going to do it. There's complaining does nothing, right? It just uses energy, and my wife and I joke about this. This happens even in parenting and in marriage, right? My wife and I are just a true team. And when we're in the house, it's like, hey, if she's busy and I'm in the kitchen and the kitchen is a mess and there's only one person there that can clean it, and that's me, and I don't feel like cleaning it, but guess what? Oh, well, I'm just going to clean the darn kitchen, or I'm going to do the laundry, or, and we just both, that's the one thing one place we get along. And I think something that you found in the SEAL teams too, is like, people just understood, hey, if the job needs to get done, just do the job. Just don't bitch and moan. That is useless energy. It's not doing anything for you. That also allows you the opportunity to, when the time comes where you're like, you know what, I just feel like being lazy right now. You can say, well, you know what? Nothing has to get done right now, so I'm going to be lazy. I'm going to enjoy the heck out of being lazy. I'm going to play my video games and enjoy that, right? So yeah, I think it's just being pragmatic about the whole thing.
I think oftentimes we let perfect be the enemy of the good, right? We have like black or white thinking. If we're not always on our A game, then we might as well not even try to ever be on our A game.
Right.
So I think it's really important not to strive for perfection, which is an ideal that doesn't really exist in any aspect of life.
That's right.
But instead to do the best that you can, and maybe try to iterate, right? Like, try to be a little bit better than you were yesterday.
Yeah. Well, this is kind of what I describe as the difference between peak performance and optimal performance, right? And everybody nowadays seems to be chasing peak, on a peak as much as possible. But we have to understand peak. Peak is Peak is just an apex from which we can only go down, right? I mean, that's it, right? It also has to be scheduled. It has to be planned and prepared for. I mean, the pro football player plans his entire week so that he may peak for 3 hours on Sunday, right? And really, when people would come to me and say, "Well, you SEALs, you're the ultimate peak performers," like, actually, we're not. We are actually optimal performers, and optimal performance is different. Optimal performance is how can I do the very best I can in the moment, whatever the best looks like in that moment. Okay, sometimes the best looks like peak. Everything's going and clicking and flowing. Everything's cool. Sometimes my best is I am head down, grinding it out. All I got is the ability to go step by step. That's all I have, and it's dirty, it's ugly, it's muddy, it's gritty, it's grimy, but I'm just head down, gutting it out. Okay, and there's nothing fun about it, right? That is also optimal performance. And so if we think about performing optimally, it allows us to do a couple things. First, it allows us to pat ourselves on the back in those moments where it's just ugly and dirty and grimy and gritty, and we're just going step by step, right? But then it allows us to think about energy a little bit differently. Think about energy in a long game way, right? Sometimes I don't need to be peak when I'm driving to the grocery store. I can actually relax. The guys in the helicopter who are going to the mission, they understand that they may in fact have to be at ultimate peak in the next 10 minutes, right? So in this moment, they're going to be, relaxing, eyes closed, calm, collected, conserving energy, right? So I think it's just much more both realistic and responsible for us to strive for optimal performance versus peak performance, and that allows us permission to not be perfect. Like you said, perfection is the lowest standard in the world because it's impossible, right? I mean, so don't try to chase it because you're never going to get it. Strive for the long game and start celebrating those ebbs and flows. And I think you'll set yourself up for long-term success, especially in times when the environments get really, really challenging.
Yeah, that's true. What do you do when the environment does become really challenging and, you're in a situation like oftentimes we can change the environment, right? We can architect the environment to be easier, to be more aligned with our goals, our values. But sometimes you can't change the environment. Like if you're dealing with like a sick loved one, for example, if you are, like you're in a situation that you just can't get out of.
Yeah, no, you're right. I think we fool ourselves in thinking we can change our environment, but we really can't. I mean, the environment's the environment, and there really is very little certainty that we know exactly what's going to happen. I mean, something can happen anytime. And so I think what we have to understand is there's a couple things that we can manage that we have direct control over. We have direct control over our physiology, first of all. So understanding that we have control over our physiology helps us bring down anxiety. We can manage anxiety through that control. We can do things that help us shift out of sympathetic response into parasympathetic response, right? Whether it's open gaze, like we talked about, breathing techniques, right, that you can use to relax, to calm down a little bit, visualization techniques, whatever those things are, whatever you have access to in the moment, you can use to shift your physiology. Once you shift your physiology, what's happening is, and again, people have to understand, when anxiety begins to ramp up, we start to initiate the fear response. The amygdala gets tickled in our brain, so we start heading towards amygdala overload, right? As that starts happening, our frontal lobe, conscious brain, starts to come offline, right? And as we get closer and closer to amygdala hijack, that we get less and less frontal lobe control. So full-blown amygdala hijack is we're just moving, we're not even thinking, right? And that is not good in any situation, right? I mean, so managing our anxiety helps us bring our conscious mind back online, okay? Once our conscious mind is back online to a good extent, we can then begin to manage uncertainty. Uncertainty deals with the external, okay? And there's very little we can do about the external in an uncertain environment external to us, other than we can start to manage our perception of it. And we do that through appropriate questions, right? And we start asking ourselves, okay, what about this environment do I understand? All right. Now, but just by asking that question, you might take that 100% of uncertainty and maybe boil it down to maybe I don't know, 80% uncertainty. So it's like, okay, 20% of this I actually understand. Okay. Out of that 20%, what can I control in this moment? All right. And then you immediately focus in on what you can control. What can I do right now? Sometimes that is like, well, I know how to manage myself over the next hour. Sometimes that's like, I can manage myself through a count of 10, right? The next 10 breaths, I will do that. So a great example would be, again, in SEAL training, you do surf torture, right? Where you line up with your fellow students and they have you march out into the surf zone to about knee high. You turn around and you lay back, and the waves just crash over you and then they recede. Now you're in Southern California, so you and those people in your area understand how cold Southern California water is, right?
Yeah.
A lot of people in the rest of the U.S. don't understand. They think Southern California, think it's tropical. No, that water is damn cold, right? Especially in November or in the wintertime when it's down in the 50s, right? So that surf torture is like one of the coldest things you experience. You get a lot of people quitting during surf torture because you're in there for what seems like hours, right? You're just freezing your ass off.
Wait, so you're just surf torture? You're lying backwards into the water? That's it? You're just in cold water? It's not that cold.
You're laying backwards, and the waves are basically crashing over you, and then receding and crashing over, and you're getting pulled. So there's a little bit of water torture going on because
it's like water. You're being waterboarded by the waves.
A little bit by the waves, and just know that the water's cold, and then the water recedes, and the wind hits you, and then the water hits you again, and the wind hits you. It's like a combo, right? And so and it's usually at night. So I can remember sometimes being in surf torture and just saying to myself, all right, well, this sucks. I'm just going to focus on the fact that even though I'm freezing right now, probably in a shorter period of time, I'll be on that beach and I'll be doing so many push-ups that I'm really hot, right? And that's how I'd get through it. And then I'd be on the beach doing push-ups. I'd be like overheating. Like, well, I mean, I'm going to do this, but soon I'll be in the surf zone freezing. I'll cool off, right? And so you can manage. Sometimes that management is like just moments in front of you, right? You say, I'm going to manage the next few moments, or I'm going to manage, the next few hours. Some guys will say, well, I just focused on the next meal. I just make it to the next meal. That's what I can control. But largely, just put this in normal people's contexts, right? Because the SEAL stuff's crazy. Just in life, in environments of uncertainty, you can begin asking yourself questions. As long as you're managing your anxiety, okay, what do I understand and what can I control in this moment? Then take charge, do that, and you will actually initiate a dopamine reward system. You'll get a reward. Your system will reward yourself for accomplishing something, and it'll allow you to ask the question again. Okay, now what can I control? And step to that. And it's just that's how you step through uncertainty and challenge and stress. As long as you're managing your physiology.
And why do they put you through that? Like in the SEALs, is that just so that you are then accustomed to just really high stress situations?
I would say it's deeper than that. You're accustomed to performing in high stress situations. You unconsciously become a master of doing what I just talked about, right? And then you transfer that to combat when the shit really is deadly, right? And you really have to calm down and manage. And I remember I live here in Virginia, and in my neighborhood, like across the street from me is a SEAL, and then like down the road to the right there's a SEAL, and then down the road to the left there's a SEAL. So I have 4 SEALs in the neighborhood. And I remember my wife saying once, she's like, well, I'm really glad these guys are in the neighborhood because, when you're gone, if something happened, I know I could go to them and they would act like you act. And I'm like, well, what do you mean? She said, well, if something happened and I went to them, as soon as I would tell them, they immediately would calm down and they'd start working the problem. And I recognize that is a Navy SEAL trait. I mean, so I would say it's special operations, but I mean, certainly you hyper develop this idea, this habit and technique of when the shit starts really falling apart around you, you immediately calm down. You immediately calm yourself and start thinking through it, because you understand that panicking and getting upset and getting stressed is not going to help anybody, right? It's almost uncanny, and sometimes when you look back at it, you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I was calm in that moment. But you just do it naturally, and this can apply to anything you're doing, which is really quite cool.
Dude, I would not want to be like a carjacker in your neighborhood.
No, not recommended.
No.
Yeah.
Damn, 4. in one neighborhood. That's insane.
Yeah. That's probably neighborhoods around here that have more than 4. So,
Wow.
Yeah. So,
man, not a group to trifle with.
Yeah, certainly. Well, it's not. I guess it's just not a good idea. We're pretty vigilant. So,
man, so cool. That level. I mean, does that level of discipline exist anywhere else in the world? I mean, for in any other profession?
Oh my God, yeah. I think so. I mean, yeah, I think it exists in many professions. I mean, the SEAL profession is just one. I mean, you look at masterful musicians, you look at masterful artists, surgeons, teachers. I mean, name any profession and find its masters, and you will see that level of discipline because that's what it takes. I mean, it takes. And now, what would be interesting would to be study the context of that. How does that show up and manifest? One of my favorite movies, I'm not sure if you saw this, is called The Comedian. It's Jerry Seinfeld made a movie shortly after he finished the TV series, and it's on Netflix actually. It documents him. He had just basically thrown out all of his old material. He said, he'd retired. I said, thrown out. He had retired all of his old material, and he was basically learning new, building a new routine, building a new comic routine. And I just love watching these. I mean, stand-up comics, I think, are some of the best examples of grit and determination, and what I call like selfless art, right? So the way I describe it is like a painter, or even an actor in some cases. But let's just take a painter. A painter is more selfish art, right? So a painter can just paint what they want, right? And they're like, hey, if you like it, great. If you don't like it, fine. I mean, it's just, I liked doing it. So this is, if you like it, great. Comedians don't get to do that. Comedians have to create something. And the only way that they're successful is if someone else likes it, right? So it's selfless, right? It's selfless art because they have to go literally stand on a stage and risk every time. And it's like, I mean, I think Seinfeld, I love watching Seinfeld because he deconstructs comedy so deftly, right? He takes it down into the elements, and it's like, yeah, it'd be like going to work in your underwear every day, right? I mean, you're just opening up and just seeing what works. And it's just a painful, slow process of getting like, all right, I got 5 good minutes. Okay, now I got 10 good minutes. Okay, now I got 15 minutes. All right, now I got 20 minutes. Now I'm at 30 minutes. And like he talks about, like the coup de grace for a comic is like having a 60-minute, bit. Having to be able to do a special or stand up in front of an audience and give them 60 minutes, right? But it takes months to get there. It takes months of just grinding out in comedy clubs, trying things out, going
years
back
probably.
to the. Yeah, I mean, depends on the comic, but I guess it depends on the dedication. I mean, guys like Seinfeld or guys he talks about will be at the clubs every night. I mean, even Chappelle. I mean, Chappelle. You watch Chappelle and he looks so polished, right? When he's up there on his Netflix specials, that's a guy who's in the clubs and he's just basically working on shit, And sometimes if he's trying new stuff, he'll get 90%, no laughs, and maybe 10% will work. He's like, okay, I'm going to take that 10% and massage it and see what happens. So I think we talk about that level of discipline. You can find it everywhere. And I think anybody who's really, really good at what they do, it doesn't come easy. I mean, none of this comes easy, no matter what profession you pick. I mean, even podcasting, man. I mean, you could say, I mean, how many times did you have to do this before you're like, okay, actually, I think I'm actually good at asking questions now. This is feeling a little bit more natural. I mean, you don't just sit in the seat and make it happen. You have to do it over and over and over again. I mean, that takes discipline.
Oh yeah, I thought I sucked when I first started.
Yeah.
That was probably why I had the idea of doing a podcast way earlier than when I launched it, but I didn't. I procrastinated on it because I was just like, I don't think that I'm going to be any good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I definitely started better than I thought I would have, and I've gotten better over time. And now my podcast is the most fulfilling thing that I do. I love it so much.
Yeah, and it takes work. It takes anybody who wants to be good at anything and get to the point where they really are loving it, right? It's going to take some discipline. It's going to take some scraped up knees or egos or whatever, scraped up whatever.
Yeah. Well, it's very interesting that you bring that up because this is something that I've been thinking a lot about recently. And it's that most people have a near zero tolerance for criticism.
Yeah.
And so they live lives and they curate their lives and their professions and their environments where the chance of being criticized drops to near zero, right?
Right.
But some people out there, a minority of people, have a higher than average tolerance for criticism.
Right.
And I think those people end up being the musicians, the comedians, people like me. I get criticized every single day.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with it.
Yeah. Well, and just so people know, criticism doesn't necessarily have to mean just people saying bad things. Criticism comes in all different forms. I mean, getting hurt, like the skateboarder who falls a dozen times before he or she nails the certain move. That's criticism. It's just coming in a different form. The Navy SEAL who's training and finally gets it right. That's criticism in a different way, right? So I think you're absolutely right, is that if you want to be good at anything, to be masterful at anything, you have to accept the fact it's going to hurt. You're going to get some bruises, scrapes and bruises. They may come in the form of people saying, hey, you're full of shit, and I don't like you. But it might also come in the form of you just getting your knees scraped up and your elbows scraped up and your head, knocked around a little bit before you're good. But it has to happen. I mean, growth is that process. Growth. We don't. It's funny. Our learning. The way we learn, the neural networks that connect when we learn something. Okay, there's a bunch of neurotransmitters and chemicals that happen right when we create neural connections, and then of course when we lather that connection with dopamine, i.e., get better. Well, what they found is that the points at which those neurotransmitters, those chemicals, are at their maximum are when three things exist in experience, right? Those three things are focus, intensity, and novelty, right? When you have all three of those neurotransmitters, all those chemicals are at max capacity for learning. You are forging lessons, okay? This is the difference between being told a stove is hot, it's like, okay, thank you, or touching the stove and realizing it's hot. When you touch the stove, there's focus, there's intensity in the heat, and there's novelty. It's like, cool, I've never touched anything that hot. It's also why, when we learn the alphabet through a song, we never forget it, because there's all three of those things. What we have to accept is that this is why painful experiences teach us more than good experiences, okay? Because whenever we go through pain and suffering and strife, what is present inherently? Novelty, intensity, and focus, right? So it's neurologically proven that pain and challenge and this type of stuff teaches us things faster. It forges us in a faster way. And so you can if you know this, you can avoid it, or you can choose to embrace it. And man, you'll learn quickly. So
I think you ought to embrace it. I mean, also, not only does criticism help you serve as a fulcrum from which to learn from, but it, if you're being criticized, chances are you're doing something original.
Totally.
There's that line, I don't know, I think it's sometimes attributed to Aristotle: to avoid criticism, do nothing, say nothing, be nothing.
Right.
If you seek only to live a cushy life where you're not being confronted by anything, minimal risk of failure, no criticism. Yeah, I mean, it's just, you could probably find a life that caters to that, but it's
and some people might be perfectly comfortable, and that's their prerogative. I think what we have to understand, though, and just to throw the one caveat to the criticism when it comes in the form of people, right? There's a slight difference there, because it's people's opinions and therefore judgment, which means there's an extra calculus that's involved, I think, for people who are working on growing something, and that is sometimes that criticism means nothing, and so some of the criticism from people is to be ignored.
Yeah,
you're right. Whereas again, it's different for a skateboarder. When a skateboarder falls while trying to, that you can't ignore that. It's like, okay, I did something wrong. But
exactly.
Sometimes people are just, especially in the world of social media, where any lala can get on Twitter and say something. Sometimes it's to be ignored. Sometimes it's to be laughed at. I just recently I got an email. We'd have this assessment tool on the website so people can go and find what their attribute scores are. And we're working on it. We're trying to improve it and things, and we're trying to get it better. I got one recently, and it was just a response saying, "You're full of shit. You know nothing, Rich Snow." And I was like, I wrote back immediately. I was like, this is one of my favorite criticisms, because I love Game of Thrones, by the way.
Yeah, who doesn't love Game of Thrones?
So it's just like, this is, I mean, we're working to get it better, but I had to laugh. And it's like, so sometimes criticism from humans is to be absorbed and metabolized in a good way. It's like, okay, I'm learning something because that's actually effective criticism. Sometimes it's to be completely ignored because like this person's just standing on a pedestal for no reason. And then sometimes
just
it's to be laughed at. Yeah. And sometimes it's just, oh my God, that's hilarious. Thank you for that laugh, because that's funny. So
well said. Don't take criticism from anybody that you wouldn't take advice from.
Right.
Good advice. Yeah, trolls, man. There's so many trolls on social media, but there are trolls in real life too.
There are, but in the workplace. And we've heard. I mean, the social media allows for a predominance of trolls because there's zero accountability, right? It's so much harder. For me to you and I are virtual right now. If you and I were face to face, it's so much harder if you say, "Hey, Max," like in your face, "Max, you are full of shit and you know nothing." That's way harder because there's going to be a consequence to that statement when I'm face to face with you. And it might not be physical. It might just be like a hurt look in your face, right? You'd be like, oh my God, that really hurts. That's still consequential for me emotionally.
I mean, let's be honest. You're a former Navy SEAL. There's going to be minimal consequence for you.
Well, no, even if you were hurt, like what if you burst into tears? Then I'd feel bad, right?
Right. There you go.
There you go. But I mean, again, social media takes away the consequence. It takes away any accountability. So someone can literally say something. It's like lobbing grenades from behind a wall, right? Someone can say something that's extremely critical. This is what's happening with our teenagers, right? With the teenage bullying going on. The bullying, I mean, back in my day, I hate to say that, I sound so old, but back in my day, bullying was in your face. I mean, someone looked at you and gave you a wedgie while looking you in the eyes. You knew exactly what was happening, right? The social media allows that shit to happen with no accountability, and that's why it's so dangerous. And that's why if there's one lesson we should remind ourselves and teach our kids, is to take zero stock in what you're getting from social media in terms of criticism, unless it's very well thought out and done. I've had some very well thought out emails saying, "Hey, Rich, I took this and here's what I feel," and blah blah blah. And it was like, oh my God, thank you so much for taking the time to write that out and tell me what we could do better. That's like very, very helpful. But if it's not like that, discard it.
Yeah, I mean, and you are a newly minted public figure. Your book, fairly recently came out last year, and so has that changed your relationship with social media?
Well, I didn't have one before the book came out, so we created one, and it's been slow going. And so I'd say I approached the social media relationship already with this idea that I wanted to do it carefully. I wanted to do it thoughtfully. I am not someone who trends to that type of stuff anyway. I mean, I'm used to being a ghost, which is, so when you get on social media and start posting stuff, it's like, that's kind of weird. So my, I know my web team has said, hey, just, you need to do more, push more and get some more stuff out there. And it's fine. We're just getting paced on it. But yeah, I've gone into it with a very, realistic view, about what can come back, and really my thing is, hey, listen, this is not, none of the stuff I do is do I want to be about Rich Diviney. I mean, that's not, I want it to be about the ideas. I mean, there's nothing about, I'm just a guy who has some ideas that I think can help people, right? And if can get those ideas out to people so that they can help themselves, help other people, that it doesn't have to have a big Rich Diviney on top of it, right? Just do more with yourself, find your potential, and that's all I need. So,
yeah. I'm just curious, have current trainees in the SEAL program reached out to you? Have they found your work? Has it resonated with them? Yeah,
I'd say yes, because I am still involved. One of the older SEALs who was retired when I was getting in, but he runs an organization that helps guys get to SEAL training, and he said they've recommended the book to some of the guys in the training process, and they really found it very helpful. So that's cool. And then I have a couple team guy friends who are still in the system, who one in particular who does some instructing. He said, hey, I'm trying to get all the instructors to read this so they know more. So that's really cool. And then when I have buddies who are former team guys with me, and they say, "Hey, I'm making my kids read this book." I'm like, "Okay, cool, that's nice." so yeah, it's filtered in there. But again, the SEAL training the Naval Special Warfare community has been doing some great work on this type of stuff ever since we started talking about it back, almost a decade ago. So they've made tremendous progress in that vein as well. So I think we've seen a very nice uptick and kind of a progression of us of the whole community looking at this stuff a little bit more deeply.
I love that. For listeners or viewers who are not yet familiar with your book, The Attributes, we did a whole previous episode on your book and some of those attributes. And I think as I mentioned earlier, in this episode, it's a wonderful book. People should definitely check it out. But just give us sort of like the high level notes on what people stand to gain from reading your book, because I think it's a really good one. It's definitely worth checking out.
Well, thank you. The idea is that our performance, the team's performance, has to be broken down into elements, right? It's not just about what we usually think it's about as skill. So there's a difference between skills, which are those things that we learn and you can teach, and they're very didactic and visible, and attributes, which are hidden qualities. They're the things like patience and situational awareness. Those qualities we bring into a situation that inform our behavior rather than dictate. And so what I did was, based on a lot of the work I did while I was still a SEAL and I was running training, I basically broke down what at least 25 of these attributes are for optimal performance. And so I think a reader can read this book and start to get a sense of how and why they perform the way they do by understanding how much of each attribute they have, and then what each attribute means in terms of the context. And so I think we talked about it last time, but the categories are: what are the attributes that make up grit? What are the attributes that make up mental acuity, how our brain processes the world? What are the attributes that make up drive and being a driven human being? What are the attributes that make up great leadership? And then the attributes that make up great team ability, our ability to work with other people on a team. And so by reading the book, the book is really not a SEAL book at all. It's a book about the reader, right? So when you read it, it's really about you, the reader, and allowing you to say, okay, let me figure out my own performance. How can I deconstruct my own performance to see why and how I show up the way I do? Ultimately, we are all, I kind of liken us to automobiles. We're all automobiles, but some of us are Jeeps, and some of us are SUVs, and some of us are Ferraris. And there's no judgment, because the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do, and the Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do. But it is a good idea to look under your hood and figure out what you are, right? Because you may be a Jeep that's been trying to run on a Ferrari track all this time, or a Ferrari that's been trying to run on a Jeep track. And so understanding that allows you to say, okay, now I know, okay, I'm actually going to go to a Jeep track because that's what I want. That's really where I'll be happy. Or if you decide, hey, I am a Jeep, but I still want to run on this Ferrari track, then you start to know exactly what you need to work on to be a better Jeep running on a Ferrari track, right? So it's all about these elemental factors that make up our behavior and our performance. And so that's why it's kind of a fun book to dig into and dissect oneself.
I love that. I love that analogy. I think I'm a Jeep.
Yeah, I am too. I associate with the Jeep.
Practical but capable.
Yeah.
When push comes to shove.
Yeah, I'm pretty rugged and tough. Don't really look that good. I can't go that fast, but I'm in it for the long haul. I'll be fine. So
you're reliable.
That's right.
Hey guys, if you enjoyed that conversation, you're gonna love this one.
So I started trainings in San Diego. My first duty station was in Hawaii, and I was working with our kind of mini submarines called the SDVs, and then from there went to the East Coast, to Virginia Beach, where the East Coast SEALs are, and it was there basically pretty much my whole career. So, and I'm an East Coaster anyway. I grew up in New England, so East Coast was kind of home for me. So.
Wow! And is it true that there are only about like 2,500 on duty? Active duty SEALs at any given time?
Yeah, I'd have to look at the numbers. The war caused us to have to beef up the numbers a little bit. So I would guess that there's somewhere between 3,500 and 4,000 active duty at any one time. So it was what I guess. But naval special warfare is SEALs. It's special warfare combatant crewmen, which are boat guys. It's also just a mushroom of support, whether it be combat support, intelligence, logistics. So the special operators, the SEALs, whether you're SEAL, Green Beret, or whatever, get a lot of the cool guy credit, but none of us could ever do what we did without the support of everyone around us, our intel folks, our support folks, our supply folks, our logistics folks. I mean, it is truly a team, a community, and so Naval Special Warfare as an organization is fairly large because it takes a lot of support to do that type of job.
I'm sure that makes a lot of sense. So you have this new book coming out, The Attributes, which I'm super excited for. I think it's actually a brilliant book. I've skimmed it already, and I'm excited to do a deep dive. How did you come to write this book? Like, when did you decide to pivot your career and focus full time on public speaking and writing?
Well, that's a great question. The pivot didn't come till I was retired. That's when I began to start thinking, right, what do I want to do? So I'd always been interested in writing. The idea for the book came well before I retired. It was about midway through my career, and I was in charge of training, assessment, and selection for one of our more specialized SEAL commands. And in this particular command, what would happen was we'd actually take very experienced SEALs. They'd apply to come to our command, and then we would run them through our own selection course, about 9 month selection course, to see if they had what it took to be at that specific command. And what we had was typical still about a 50% attrition rate. And so we were in a position when I took over where we weren't able to effectively explain why guys were making it and why guys weren't making it, because again, we were talking about guys who had stellar records and achievements and performance. They were coming very highly recommended, and they were getting to our program. Some of them weren't making it through. And to say something like, "Well, you didn't have what it took. You didn't cut it," was really not, it was a very demoralizing thing to tell someone, to that person and to us, because it didn't describe to us effectively what was going on. If we can't describe what we're doing, it's not helpful for us either. So I was tasked with, by my commanding officer at the time, can you look at what we're doing and better articulate it? And so that's really when I began to look back at our roots. And this is when we kind of went back to regular SEAL training. I mean, the SEALs were formed back in the 40s with World War II, and they were formed as the underwater demolition teams. When they were planning, when they knew they had to invade Europe with a massive amphibious invasion, they recognized, based on lessons from World War One, that they needed to get men who could swim ashore and reconnoiter and look for obstacles so the ships could come in, the landing craft could come in. And so they said, we need guys who can swim in, plant explosives on these obstacles, clear paths so these Marines can land. So Draper Kaufman was tasked with creating this unit, and he had previously created an explosives ordnance disposal school. And so he had in his, I guess, Rolodex of contacts and connections, a whole host of guys who had the appropriate skills to do the job. They could swim. They could all swim. They could all put explosives on obstacles. They could all, sneak across beaches and things like that. What he recognized, though, is that in that environment, he needed men who could do the job. So how to do the job and could do the job are two different things, right? How to implied skills. I have the skills to do it. Can you do it when things are really rough? So in what I kind of nicknamed unconscious genius, he said, I'm going to start the whole training program with a week of just intense training where I only let the candidates sleep for maybe an hour or two. We put them through physical tests, some mental tests, but basically take them to exhaustion and beyond. And he said, I'm not going to evaluate anybody. I'm not going to run any tests. I'm not going to grade anybody. The only thing that will qualify someone to stay or leave is their own decision. So is someone going to quit or someone to stay? Well, most guys quit. About 90% quit. But he knew that at that point he had the 10% that would be able to effectively operate. So that week, later morphed into what is known as Hell Week today. Bud says Hell Week is the 5th week, not the 1st. But ultimately, what he was looking for is not the skills, but the attributes. The attributes are things like, so just to level up the playing field. What I really was able to, with my team, deconstruct is that skills and attributes are different. Skills are not inherent to our nature. So we're not born with the ability to ride a bike, throw a ball, or shoot a gun in the military case, right? We have to learn those things. We have to be taught them. You can sit down and learn a skill, right? You can actually learn something on the periphery. If you and I sit down at a computer for 6 months for a job, we're going to learn how to type, right? That's a skill. They dictate our behavior, right? So they tell us what to do in certain situations. So here's how to drive a bike or drive a car. Here's how to ride a bike, so on. And then because they dictate behavior, they're very easy to assess, measure, and test. You can see how well someone does those things. which is why that most hiring processes, selection processes, get seduced by skills first, right? Best sales guy, best HR rep, best graphics designer. Those are all skills, top grades, right? What skills don't tell us is how people are going to operate in uncertainty and challenge, because in uncertainty and challenge, the skills that dictate behavior don't apply. You can't necessarily apply a skill to an unknown situation. This is where attributes come in. Attributes are inherent to our nature.
Hmm.
We're actually born with levels of perseverance, adaptability, resilience, situational awareness, right? You can see those things in small children. And so certainly they develop over time, but you can see them as young as small children. They inform our behavior rather than dictate it, right? So your and my level of perseverance, adaptability, and resilience, for example, will inform the way we learn how to ride a bike when we fall off that bike 10 times or so, right? But because they're hidden, they're very difficult to assess, measure, and test. When you see them the most viscerally is during times of challenge, stress, and uncertainty, because that's when they come to the fore. I can't apply a known skill, so my attributes, so I'm going to lean on my patient's adaptability. So a great example for all of us is 2020,
Yeah.
right? I mean, COVID especially threw us almost overnight into this deep environment of uncertainty. Very few of us had the skills with which we could apply right away. We all had to basically say, okay, what the hell is going on and how am I going to deal with it? We were leaning on things like attributes, adaptability, resilience, all this stuff, all the things I talk about in the book. And so that type of situation began to bring those to the fore. This is exactly why I was able to kind of study these so easily in SEAL training, running what I was, because the SEAL training by its very nature is to put people in stress, challenge, and uncertainty. We're looking for attributes. So I began to do this when I was running this training. It stuck in my mind. And then 10 plus years later, when I retired, I began to do public speaking around leadership and things like that. I'd always been really interested in human performance, though. Why do people and how do people behave the way they behave? And really, quite honestly, how do people just excel? And see, I grew up in Connecticut. I was an average kid. I was an average student. I was an average athlete. I mean, I didn't have any real trauma or real distinctive stories that could add to my narrative as, oh, this is why he became a Navy SEAL. There's nothing like that. I was just a normal kid. Yet, and then when I went through SEAL training, I made it through and I found myself staring at people who, man, I'm surrounded by superheroes here.
Hmm.
How did I get here, right? What was interesting to me is most of the guys thought that way. They'd look around and say, I'm surrounded by superheroes, but we all felt distinguished. We all felt pretty average. Like there's nothing special about us, is how we all felt. Most SEALs will say that. There's nothing really special. We just figured out a way to capitalize on our strengths. And so this is when I began to really think about attributes. When I got out of the military and I was interested in human performance, I started talking about high performing teams. I kept on getting asked, hey, Rich, we just put together this dream team. Got the top sales guy, the top graphics designer, top whatever, right? They were awesome until things went sideways and the team just went toxic. They fell apart. And they said, why does that happen? I said, because you were looking at the wrong things. You were putting together your team based on skills when you really needed to put your team together based on attributes, because attributes will tell us how we perform, both in normal times in a hidden way, but certainly when things go south. And so what I did was for the book, I basically took the attributes that I had explored in the SEAL teams, tried to ubiquitize them, right? Because some of them don't apply in normal life like they do in the SEAL teams, and then put them in the categories. What are the grit attributes? What are the mental acuity attributes? What are the drive attributes? What are the ones that make up great leadership? And what are the ones that make up great team ability? And came up with 25. And again, that's not an exhaustive list. There are a lot more than 25. But,
there are more than 25?
Well, I talk about 25, but there are more than 25 attributes that exist. So
it's fascinating.
yeah.
And I love how you've categorized them by 5 sort of umbrella categories. You've got attributes that are indicative of grit, attributes that are indicative of mental acuity, the drive that one has. I love that. But one thing that I just want to clarify. So attributes, you said skills you can learn over time. You have the capacity to develop and improve upon your skill set. Attributes to a certain degree you're born with. Are you suggesting that they're immutable, that we can't develop attributes that we aren't born with, that we can't improve upon the attributes that we might already exhibit?
Right. I am absolutely not suggesting that. We can actually
great. That's good news.
Yeah, we can totally improve. The difference is you can't do it the same way you can learn a skill. An attribute has to be developed. It has to be first of all, you have to be self-motivated. It has to be self-directed, and you also have to kind of decide to consciously put yourself into environments of discomfort so that you may test and develop that attribute. So if you are, for example, an inherently impatient person and you want to develop your patience, well, I can't sit down and teach you a class on how to be patient. It's not going to work. You have to decide, I want to learn my patience. I want to develop my patience. Then you have to put yourself into environments that test your patience, right? So it goes with any attribute. If you want to be more adaptable, if you want to be more resilient, if you want to be more disciplined, whatever it is, you have to do it yourself. But they can be developed. Yeah, they're not immutable, but it's your decision. There are some attributes you may not need to or want to develop, depending on your role in life, depending on what you're doing. I mean, I have leadership attributes. Not everybody is really a leader per se. I mean, we all have relationships, but maybe you're a comedian, right? It's kind of a self-directed profession, right? So you don't need to be a leader per se, or a great teammate. So there's some of those that you might not need to develop. It's really up to the individual.
I love that. So how did you then adapt these attributes that you identified in your, among your team members, and then sort of extrapolate out so that people from all different professions could basically benefit from them?
Well, I first thing I did was, when we did it for the team, we came up with 36. So the first thing I did was I looked at that list and said, okay, based on what I know now, which ones are more skilly than they are attribute-y? So I took out those, and then I looked at, there were some that were distinctly designed for, I would say, good for SEAL team action, right? I mean, so each team, depending
was bloodlust one of the ones that didn't make the cut?
I didn't explore that one. But honestly, if someone had bloodlust, I would probably deselect them, because there needs to be that's a little bit too far. You need to, so the warrior profession, is something that I think, well, most of us think has to be taken very seriously. When you are really endowed with to put it bluntly, permission to take life, that is a responsibility that's very weighty, and if you don't consider that, and if you don't have the right mentality around that, you have problems. Some of those problems we've seen played out, because some of it becomes public, and you're like, yeah, that's a problem, right? When you're in war, you have to really be cognizant of that. And I think choosing the right people, and I think the selection process, whether it be SEAL selection process or any selection process, but the SEAL one is the one I'm most familiar with. I think they've done a great job, and they continue to do great work in trying to codify and understand what are those attributes you're looking for, and bloodlust certainly would not be one of them, right? So
that's really funny. I can already tell which ones have been beneficial to me as a sort of media entrepreneur, author. Definitely grit, and we can sort of break these apart, which I love that you do in the book. I mean, it's so cool the way that you've organized this, but courage, perseverance, adaptability, resilience. I mean, these are all so important, especially today, especially in the year 2020. If there's anything that 2020 has proven us, is that shit can go sideways real quick.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And you need to have some degree of grit.
Yeah, you do. Grit is inherently human. And one of the things that was interesting for me in studying grit was that a lot of people think of grit as an attribute. And it's really not. It's not just one thing. It's a combination of things. And, Angela Duckworth did a book on grit, which is a really good book. And she said kind of the same thing. It's a combination of different things that make up grit. I certainly took the optic from, okay, what are the attributes that make up grit, and tried to simplify and make it pretty elemental. But courage, I mean, courage is, so courage is interesting. It was a fascinating one for me, courage, because, that's our mutual friend, Andrew Huberman, and I worked on this a lot together, because he studies it in the lab and I kind of experienced it in the field, right? But the idea of what courage is that it is basically the ability to move into fear. Well, okay, what does that mean? Well, now we have to understand what fear is. Well, fear is actually interesting. Fear is actually the combination of two things. It's a combination of uncertainty plus anxiety, right? If you think about these two things in their singular versions, right? You can have anxiety without uncertainty. That's, I don't know, I'm nervous to do this podcast, right? But I'm not uncertain about it, right? I'm just, have some anxious, or I'm nervous to give a presentation at work. That's anxiety without uncertainty. Uncertainty without anxiety, well, that's every kid on Christmas Eve, right?
Mm-hmm.
You combine the two and you begin to get fear, right? So if you have both anxiety and uncertainty, that's when fear starts to emerge. Fear is in many ways a kind of an elemental unconscious response. It's your autonomic nervous system starting to ramp up, in some cases taking over, right? But you're certainly starting to teeter into the fight or flight response. Now, the freeze response is in there too, but really scientifically what they've seen is the freeze response is really just a rapid oscillation between fight, or you're kind of trying to decide between both, right?
Whether to fight or flight.
Whether fight or flight. So what's interesting about the neuroscience around this is that they've discovered circuits that actually switch on with each of those responses. So if you fight, a certain circuit switches. If you flight, if you flee, a certain circuit turns on. That circuit that turns on when you fight, and by fight we mean move into fear. It's not put up your dukes, right? When you fight and that circuit goes, that's the courage switch. That's the courage circuit. You are switching on the courage circuit. And you're moving into your fear. Once you do that, you actually get a hit of dopamine. You get rewarded because from an evolutionary perspective, we had to do this. Humans had to be encouraged to move out, to move on, to explore, to discover, find berries, find food, whatever. So we needed a system in our physiology that encouraged us to do this. So that's dopamine, right? So when we decide to move into our fear, we get a dopamine response. We are all predisposed with kind of a certain level at which our fear begins to set in, our autonomic response begins to kick in. If most of us are at like boiling point, like 212, right? We all know people who get afraid a lot faster, right? Maybe their boiling point is like 190, right? So they get afraid fast. There are other people who get afraid. It takes them a while, right? They maybe at 230. This is like the Alex Honnold free solo, right? Where it takes a while to kick on that switch. But the idea is once it kicks on, so that would indicate our level of courage as an attribute. The good news is we can decide to move into it. And when we move in, we get rewarded. The key thing about courage is that it cannot exist in the absence of fear. Fear has to be part of it. So, me, who's, and I talk about in the book being afraid of heights. I don't like heights, and so skydiving was always a challenge for me, but every time I moved into that, I'd get rewarded and encouraged me to do it. So we can actually work on that and move through it and train ourselves to move through fear. I would maintain, I don't want to speak, exclusively here or for the group, but I would maintain that one of the most powerful qualities of Navy SEALs or spec operators or even military folks is that not that they're fearless. It's that we've all designed our systems. We've practiced moving into fear habitually. We understand how to do it, and when we have to do it, we do it. And that's really the power behind a lot of people of service, whether it's a firefighter, a police officer, a surgeon, or a nurse who's who fighting the COVID battle. I mean, these are people who are consistently moving into fear, and that's both admirable, but also for me fascinating, And so a lot of us had to actually work on our courage during 2020. But as an attribute, as a grit attribute, it's kind of the first step, I think, in grit and the ability to kind of move into stress, anxiety, challenge.
I love that. I mean, few people listening to this are faced with physical danger, on a day-to-day basis, the way that you and your teammates are. But is this essentially like a biological imperative to basically lean into parts of our life that evoke fear?
Yeah, fear and stress, right? I mean,
stress.
Stress by design causes us to take action. When we're hungry, our body starts feeling stressed, right? So that's our body saying, go get food. When we're lonely, our body feels stressed. That's our body saying, go find, companionship, right? So we've been designed naturally to move into, we've been designed naturally for stress to cause us to move, right? And then we've also been designed so that when stress turns into fear, we're rewarded when we keep moving. Now, again, it's not the reward when we necessarily get to the objective. It's taking every step, right? Every step we move, we get a reward. So we don't have to wait until we find the food at the other side of the mountain or whatever, or find the mate, right? Every step towards that. If you, the lonely guy who goes and talks to the girl in the supermarket who he finds attractive, he's going to get rewarded, at least from dopamine. He may not get rewarded by a phone number, but
right.
But
story of my life.
Yeah, but doing that, doing the action is a positive step, and it's evolutionary. It's designed by evolution.
I love that. My mother growing up always applauded courage in my house, whether it was taking a test or going in for a medical procedure or getting a dental filling or something like that. She always identified when either me or my two younger brothers were exhibiting courage, and she would praise us for that.
Yeah,
And I definitely credit her. I mean, regular listeners of my podcast, people who know my work know that, much of my work has been not just motivated by her, but it's been sort of just a constant practice of like, moving into areas where it's sort of been uncomfortable for me,
Yeah.
and I've just sort of like went in that direction.
Yeah, and it's uncertain, right? I mean, uncertainty typically is going to come with anxiety. Human beings don't like uncertainty. Again, Christmas Eve is just one example where it doesn't, anxiety might not be additive to that. But typically when you're moving into uncertainty, there's anxiety with that. And so yeah, if we set up an environment where we're adding to the rewards of moving in. One of the best pieces of advice, and I named it, it became the name of the first chapter, the courage chapter. One of the best pieces of advice a senior officer once told me was to beware the fearless leader, because he'll likely get you killed, right?
Wow.
Because if you have a leader who shows no fear, then that person is not effectively managing risk, because fear is designed to make us stop, make us think, make us contemplate, and decide to either move into it or flee. Sometimes flee is the right answer. Don't get me wrong. Sometimes it is. We're not supposed to fight a bear, but yeah, you have to. Anybody well, I would maintain anybody who purports to be fearless is lying. But if you actually see that type of behavior, I'd probably keep a distance.
There was that amazing scene in one of my favorite movies of all time, The Dark Knight Rises. I'm a huge fan of the Dark Knight trilogy. It's like one of my favorite. I mean, I just like obsessed. And when Bruce Wayne is stuck in the pit in wherever on Earth that pit happens to be, Bane puts him there after he breaks his back. The prisoner who he's imprisoned with, his prison mate, is asking him like, when he's going to take the leap, when he's going to like try to get out of the thing. And Bruce Wayne keeps saying that he's like not afraid of death. He has no fear of death. And his prison mate says, well, that's your problem.
Right.
You have to fear death, and then you have to harness that fear.
Yeah. Some of the best music. So, by the way, I listened to that specific soundtrack. It's that part. I think it's called "The Climb" or "Why Do We Fall?" Is the music, right? It's beautiful because it's like, that's exactly it. You need, we are designed to fight faster, to move stronger, to survive. If we have fear, if you have no fear, that's dangerous. So
yeah, you need fear.
Yeah.
I love the mental acuity section. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yes. So mental acuity was probably the one that I focused on the most when I was running the SEAL training piece, because again, we were dealing with guys who were very experienced, and we were putting them through training scenarios. And one particular one is close quarter combat, which is really the act of clearing a room or building. So you run into a building, you have to clear it. Either you're finding someone you have to, grab or save. But the idea is you have to go room by room. Police officers do that when they have to go and take down a house or find a bad guy. But that's the sequence of close quarter combat, or CQC, is actually very dynamic and very unpredictable. In other words, it's constantly changing, right? No run is ever the same, and it's all a matter of you as an individual adjusting rapidly to your teammates in a very dynamic, and in the case of live fire, could be deadly, scenario or environment. And so mental acuity attributes became really something I focused on, because it's really about how the brain works and how the brain processes our environment. So it's 4 of them. It starts with situational awareness. So how aware are we of everything that's coming in? So we get 11 million bits of information a second. Yeah, through all of our senses, right? And that's all 5. I guess 6 if we if we want to get a little bit more into it. But our logical, our frontal lobe really only processes I think 2,500 or 3,000 of that, right? So so there's a lot happening that we're not noticing. Well, excuse me, we're noticing, our senses are noticing, but we're not putting attention to it. Like, we can say that, right now you're not noticing the bottom of your feet in your shoes, right? Until I just told you. Now you're noticing it, right?
Now I am.
But for a while there, we weren't, right? So situational awareness is your ability to take in that information and actively process it in the way that's, okay, I noticed this, I noticed that. In a word, it's kind of vigilance. So higher vigilant people or hyper vigilant people will notice a lot of things. I was always this way, but I've certainly hyper developed this in my career, right? I'm the type of person who, when I walk down street in New York City, I'm noticing people. I'm noticing their hands. I'm noticing dark alleys. I'm noticing doorways. I'm noticing traffic coming at me, right? I'm noticing a lot of things. You can be overly vigilant, that's too much. That becomes stressful, right? But situational awareness in short is your ability to take in information. Once you take in that information, you now have to compartmentalize it to effectively operate. And that's based on, okay, what is my objective at this moment? And what in this mass of incoming information can I use to effectively achieve my objective? So this would be, and I kind of use this example in the book, but this would be, I'm at an airport and I'm late for my flight. Okay. And I'm running through the gates, right? There's a lot of information around me, right? I can see the Chili's, I can see the bathrooms, I can see the board, I can see the gate numbers. Out of everything that I can see, everything I'm taking in, I can hear the announcement, right? Everything I'm taking in, what do I need to focus on right now? Well, I need to focus on finding my gate, right? So compartmentalization is immediately taking it in, assessing it, prioritizing it. Okay, out of everything I'm just noticing, I don't need to know about the Chili's. I don't need to know about the bathrooms. I don't need to know about the flight board because I have to find my way in there anyway. What I'm going to focus on is the gate signs, right? So
Mhm.
assessing, prioritizing. Okay, I'm gonna focus on the gate size, and then focusing. Now I'm gonna focus on this and move towards. That is compartmentalization. Now that's kind of buttressed and assisted by task switching, which is kind of the next phase. Task switching is our ability to come out of one focus and into another. So this happens all the time naturally, right? If you're driving a car and you park it and um, so let me back up. Inside of certain contexts, there's task switching. So while we're driving a car, we're task switching, right? I'm focusing on the road at one point. I'm pushing the brake. I might be playing with the radio. Hopefully, I'm not on my phone, right? I'm
Hopefully.
putting my blinker on. That you're task switching within a context. Then you have task switching outside context, right? I park the car. I'm walking into the supermarket, right? Well, now I'm task switched I'm walking in a parking lot, which takes another set of vigilance, right? Another set of prioritization because I got to look at parked cars or moving cars. Then I move into the supermarket, and now it switches again, right? So that's task switching. So our ability to task switch effectively speaks to our level of task switching as an attribute. We of course all have it. Some of us are better at it, and some of us are not so good at it. Some people, you might be someone who, when you get focused into something, very hard for you to switch your attention. Really hard to come out and switch.
Yeah.
Um, Other people switch too fast, right?
Hmm.
This might be attention deficit could be like the far end of this, where it's like constant switching. You can't focus on anything, right? So task switching is something we'll all do. Your ability to do it efficiently, effectively speaks to your level of task switching. And then, of course, learnability is the last one because you have to be able to process and learn all these things. So if you have a high level of learnability, then you're processing things that are coming in. You're not making the same mistakes. You're learning, okay, last time I did that, it went into my hippocampus. Now I remember it, right? And I won't do the same thing again. So when we're in dynamic environments, our ability to kind of move through those cycles efficiently, effectively, starts speaking to each of these attributes. That section of the book is probably the only section where the attributes are very much um, synergized and intertwined, right? In other words, you can talk about courage in grit, and you can talk about discipline in drive. When you're in the act of being driven, right? Courage actually, you can use some courage, right? So those can be kind of segmented, but the mental acuity attributes actually all relate and they're intertwined because it's all about how your brain processes the world.
There's like overlap. You said earlier that one way to boost your efficacy in each of these attributes is to kind of lean into the the attributes where you may not be as effective.
Right.
So would you say that something like situational awareness, like how would you improve if you're not the most situationally aware person?
Yeah. First thing I would recommend is take off the headphones and put away the iPhone,
Hmm.
right? And pay attention to your environment, right? First of all, it's beautiful usually. I mean, because that the world is. Um, I do this as someone who's vigilant. I love walking in New York City. Well, of course, I'm waiting for New York City to get back where it was, right? But pre-COVID, when we had a bunch of people walking around the subways, I love the subway system. And it's because it exercises all these mental acuity attributes for me
Hmm.
because it's highly dynamic. There's a lot going on. I have to process information. I have to prioritize. I have to act, and it's thoroughly confusing. So I would say, as an individual who wants to exercise them, just put yourself into environments that allow you to notice things. Now, it could be as simple as, hey, next time you're running in the woods, don't listen to music. Don't turn on your stopwatch. Just notice. Take time to notice, be present. Their meditation practice is all about this, right? Be present in your moment, right? When it comes to compartmentalization, you can start thinking about, okay, what is it that I want to, what is my objective in this moment? Okay. Based on that objective, if it might not be as kind of drastic as, I got to find my gate because I'm late for my flight, but it might be, hey, I want to find the local library, whatever that is. Okay. As I'm driving, what are the things I need to notice to help me with that objective and prioritize that way? And then task switching it happens quite naturally. I think the best thing about the best way to effectively manage your task. Well, you can develop your task switching by doing it more effectively inside whatever context you're looking for. So it's effective when you're developing it. So I have an objective, so I'm going to task switch. So let me give you the airport example. I'm going to look for my gate. As I'm focusing on those gate numbers, I'm also paying attention to the announcements, right? The announcement, and then I hear an announcement say, "Hey, flight whatever is delayed." Well, now I can task switch, right? Because I just heard my flight was delayed. I can say, okay, well now I'm going to focus on Chili's because I'm hungry or want a beer or whatever. So the problem with task switching is most of us task switch too much, and because of these devices that we have in our pockets, right?
Yeah.
I mean, these mobile phones are literally context. They're boxes of different contexts, right? So when you go from having this conversation, you and I having a conversation, to my phone texting and beeping me, and I make that switch, that's like cognitively leaping from a library to a soccer field, right? My brain has to do the work, and it's been proven that it takes a while to get fully into that next context, especially to leap back, right? So we're actually forcing ourselves oftentimes to context switch when we actually shouldn't be. And by the way, that's exhausting. Our brains only run on about 40 watts of power, right? So when we're constantly asking it to task switch, when it's really not necessary to, well, we're going to be exhausted. This is one of the reasons why these devices are kind of exhausting us, but it's also why we're finding that the connection is not happening as well, because we're allowing ourselves to get ripped out of context when we shouldn't be, because we have a beep, even a beep, by the way, even if I heard my phone beep right now and I decided not to, well, I'm talking to you, so I'm like, that's still it's a mental leap, right? So see, even these alerts, people's like, well, I won't look at my phone, I'll just hear the alert. Well, the alert is a shift in context as well. So
there was a very interesting study that came out. I think I cite it in my book, Genius Foods. The Genius Life, where researchers found that just having a smartphone like on the table next to you exerts sort of I love the way they put it in the study. I remember it because I thought it was so beautifully put. It exerts a gravitational pull on one's attention.
Yes. Well,
just having the phone in your proximity.
Yeah. Well, and worse yet, so if you and I are talking, if we started this conversation and right beforehand I put my phone on the table, who would you think my priority is? What would you think my priority is?
Well, it's probably not 100% me. It's probably
not the 100%. Yes, yeah. Exactly right. So you are in effect, by leaving your phone, even if you're having a dinner with someone, by putting your phone in a visible way, you're actually sending a message, and the message is you're not as important as, well, I would say you're not the only thing that's important right now, right?
Yeah.
That's actually a pretty powerful subconscious message versus saying, I'm going to put this away, right? And this is it. I'm going to focus on you right now. So it can inhibit human relationship too, just by putting a phone on a table in front of you, because it's just not showing, it's not sending the right subconscious message.
I love that. I'm loving talking to you. I guess, a question that has arisen over the past, 40 minutes or so is the goal for people reading this to basically improve their attributes across the board, across all 25 of these attributes, or is it to find the attributes where they currently excel and then to sort of orient their lives around those attributes?
Yeah, I think it's probably it's more general than that. It's really to figure out where you stand and figure out what you want to do. There is certainly a strength to understanding. So it's kind of this analogy is like if you want to tweak your engine, the engine of your car, you want to put a bunch of sexy stuff on it. The first thing you better do is probably learn the engine, right? Because you start stacking things on this engine without knowing the engine, things are gonna probably start blowing up or whatever, right? I think it's the same thing with us as humans, and we have so much out there right now that purports to make you better if you do this thing or do that thing or stack this or try this technique. And there's nothing wrong with any of them. I think a lot of them actually have a lot of efficacy. But But if we don't know ourselves first, then how do we know what to stack? Right? Maybe nitrous oxide is not what my engine needs right now, right? So I think my goal for the book is someone to read it and first understand themselves. What does their own unique palette look like? And then from that point, say, okay, based on what I'd like to do or what I'm doing, what are those attributes that I would like to develop or I have enough of, or I'd like to, I don't think you need to mute attributes, but maybe you do. Maybe narcissism needs to be muted. What do I need to do to maximize my performance? And I think that's the goal. One of the things that we're offering on the website is a free assessment tool. So you go to the website, you can take an assessment for your grit attributes, your drive attributes, and your mental acuity attributes to see where you stand on these things. And it's based on a collection of data of about 1,000 people over, around the world, really. So based on grit, okay, where do I compare to 1,000 people? So it's designed to give the user a snapshot of where they might sit, and then ask them, and then read the book, and then say, okay, where do I actually sit on this based on my assessment, based on the book? Okay, what do I want to improve? And if I say, you know what, maybe I do need a little bit more empathy. Okay, how do I develop empathy, right? And I'm also put stuff on the site to help people develop that too, if you want to develop each attribute.
What's the website?
The website is theattributes.com.
Theattributes.com.
Yeah, pretty simple.
That's awesome.
So yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. It's really, there's no, I'm really fascinated with human potential, and human potential is what could be, right? But to reach what could be, we have to understand where we sit first, because what my could be is different than what your could be is, right? So I think it's really important for people to understand where they sit, introspective, kind of self-analysis. Where do I sit? How do I show up to the game? What do I have? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Okay, with that, how do I then, start marching towards my potential?
You mentioned that narcissism is an attribute,
Yeah.
which is interesting, because I tend to think about, narcissism as usually being not a good thing. I've just been told that, Max, you're too narcissistic, and I usually get smacked on the hand for it, proverbially. So how is narcissism a good thing?
Well,
or an attribute worth cultivating?
Yeah, it's certainly a pejorative word. So I wanted to explore, because I was trying to figure out what drives people, and narcissism is certainly a word that we've heard a lot of these last several years. And I think that it was one of these things that I said, you know what, I kind of had to think back to my own experience, and I can't speak for every SEAL, but I will speak for many when I say to you this, that most SEALs, we become SEALs not necessarily because we're patriotic or for love of country. Okay, we are patriotic, we love our country, but most of us become SEALs because we want to be badasses, right? We want to do something that very few people do. We want to see if we have what it takes, right? There's narcissism behind that. There's this ability, there's this desire to stand out, to be recognized, to be special. This is biological, by the way. When we are infants and we're being paid attention to by our parents, okay, we are getting bursts of serotonin, dopamine, and oxytocin. Okay, those are three very powerful chemicals. Dopamine and serotonin being neurotransmitters, they're kind of immediate. Oxytocin being the more longer term hormone. So when we get paid attention to, it feels good, right? So it feels good to stand out, be special. All of us want to do that somehow, in some way. We all want to feel special to someone. We want to be paid attention to in some ways, right? So narcissism is, I wanted to kind of humanize it, to say, hey, it's okay to be narcissistic. It's okay to want to stand out. I mean, listen, some of our greatest performers or scientists or whomever, they went down those roads because they wanted to be different. They wanted to be special. They wanted to stand out. Nothing wrong with that. It becomes wrong when it gets overboard, right? So narcissistic personality disorder is a codified disorder, right? In the DSM-5, there's 9 categories of qualities that you exhibit. That if you have, I think they say if you have any one of them, right, you have the disorder. Well, if you read those 9, you're like, okay, I don't have that, but I felt elements of that, So, and there's nothing wrong with that, right? So I think narcissism was one of those things we had to that I was really interested in saying, okay, how does it affect drive? How does it drive people? And if we are able to effectively recognize it in ourselves and say, okay, I want to be special, I want to stand out, I'm going to use this to my advantage, but make sure that I don't get overboard. That therein lies the problem, right? Because narcissism is like a vampire staring in the mirror, right? It's very difficult, if not impossible, to see in ourselves. So we have to be very careful about it. And the way we inoculate ourselves against narcissism is through our trusted, loving relationships. those people who we know we love and they love us and they tell us the truth and they tell us when we're getting out over our skis and they say, hey, your head's getting too big, stop it, right? Those are the people who keep us in check. My wife has done this for me for 20 years, right? She is my grounding wire, right? And she always will be, and my kids are the same way. So it's always funny, when in the house, I think Barack Obama said recently, he was being asked about, being the president and how he's viewed in his household. And he's like, what are you talking about? You're never the prophet in your own land, right? And that's such a good thing to say, because if that's the case, then you have a great land, because that means you're being grounded, right? And to establish relationships around you of people who love you and trust you enough and care for you enough to keep you in check is the key. True narcissists who with the actual disorder will surround themselves with sycophants, right? And if someone ceases to be a sycophant, they're ejected from the group. Usually they self-eject as they get sick of it themselves. And as soon as they do, they're demonized, right? As soon as you leave that group, the narcissist demonizes that person, right? So you can tell narcissists. You can start seeing. Well, it's usually pretty easy to see on the outside, right? But if you are in a circle, and you can kind of see this honestly, and it's a bunch of people who only agree with you, you're kind of always the center of attention, you're never wrong, right? You may want to check yourself, right? Because it's those deep relationships that really are the inoculation. But
I know so many people like that. Maybe not so many, but I've come across one or two in my time living in LA and working in sort of the media business. And yeah, they're not fun to be around if you're not a sycophant.
It's true. Yeah, and that's why those groups are typically they're very short term, right? They're constantly swapping out people, and I would say, that was another beauty of, I think, being in the SEAL teams, is you were surrounded by people who really took themselves and each other very seriously, enough that we want all of us to perform, because at the end of the day, it's not only your life, but your buddies. And the environment. If you're consistently putting yourself into environments that humble you, so you're not going to find a lot of big wave surfers, for example, who are not humble, because the ocean is the most humbling environment on the planet, right? So environmentally you can do this too. The environment humbles you as well. And so I think finding ways to be humble, to understand you're good, but it's the difference between confidence and arrogance, right? I mean, confidence, hey, I can do this, I know I can. Arrogance is, I'm better than other people, and I got nothing to learn, right?
Yeah.
And that's not the case.
I'm so glad that being a narcissist is not an inherently, or being somewhat narcissist, having somewhat. I'm just like burying myself in a ditch here, but like having somewhat narcissistic attributes is not an inherently bad thing. It's when it's out of balance with other sort of personality traits.
That's right.
When it becomes problematic.
That's right. Yeah. Some of our greatest iconoclasts had narcissistic tendencies, and we have them to thank for some of the greatest inventions and discoveries on the planet.
I love that. I feel so much better about myself. Thank you for that, Rich. So we don't have that much time left, but I just want to touch on the umbrella category into which narcissism fits, and that's drive, because I think that drive is something that many people kind of struggle with, especially today when, when there is so much uncertainty, as you described. So what can we expect by diving into that section of the book?
Well, there are 5 attributes that make it up. First is self-efficacy, and self-efficacy is kind of a combination of a couple of things. It's not just this, I got this, or I could, just do it type thing. It's this mentality that it's a combination between confidence, initiative, and optimism, right? And you have all 3 of those. Each one of those by itself is inert, right? Confidence on its own doesn't do much, right? I'm confident I could fly a plane because my dad was a pilot, my brother's a pilot. I grew up loving flying. I'm confident I could do it, but I've never flown a plane, right? So confidence on its own doesn't work. Initiative, again, you need the ability to take that first step, and initiative on its own, without being buttressed by something else, especially optimism or realism, could be dangerous, right? You can put a 6-year-old in the driver's seat of a car. He's going to have the initiative. He or she is going to have the initiative to step on that accelerator, right? But without purpose, it's dangerous, right? And then optimism tempered with realism, but not to the extent that it becomes pessimism, right? So I know I can do this, right? I have the initiative to start, and then I know along the way I will figure it out, right? So it's kind of that long-term self-efficacy. So that's number 1. Discipline is number 2. And discipline I found fascinating because I had to separate discipline with self-discipline, because they're two different things, as I discovered. And I did this through self-analysis, really, because um, I am highly unself-disciplined as a human being. I just find it very difficult, and what I realized was self-discipline is largely internally focused. I can eat right. I can work out, right? There's nothing about the external world. The external world doesn't have a lot of say in one's self-discipline, right? Um, Discipline, however, and the kind I talk about in the book, is the ability to see and achieve long-term objectives, right? Of which the external world has a part, right? I want to get that big promotion. I want to write that book. I want to become a Navy SEAL. I want to become a successful podcaster. The external world has a say in that, right? And so discipline holistically involves the ability to move through that process, and move through the highs and the lows and be able to get to your objective. Self-discipline, the highly self-disciplined person is such usually because that person loves structure, and structure is certainty, right? So sometimes being too self-disciplined can actually affect your overall discipline, right?
Hmm.
Because like you said, to be able to get where you are today, you had to march into uncertainty. Well, uncertainty is by definition uncertain, right? Which means you likely had to break structure quite a bit just to navigate that space, right? So the most successful people are the people who are both self-disciplined and disciplined, right? They know how to balance those things. But I separated because I thought it was important. There are very, very highly successful people who were very disciplined in their achievements, that as, very unself-disciplined, right? They didn't have a lot of self-discipline. So I separated that. Um, the next one is open-mindedness, which really is very self-explanatory. I mean, the closed mind is a certain mind, and to be certain about that which you'd understand is to court disaster. I
Hmm.
would say, right? You have to be able to look at things from a different optic. Um, Cunning is one that again can be pejorative, but this is really in short the ability to think outside the box, right? We are all guilty of when we're faced with problems, a bias that comes with that problems. Oftentimes, those biases are given to us in the form of rules or conditions, right? And in fact, a problem that needs to be solved has two criteria. It has a solution. It requires a solution or objective, and it has conditions or variables, right? The cunning mind starts to take those variables and conditions and asks, okay, are those actually real or perceived, and can I break them, right? And if you can break them, that's what the cunning mind does, right? Cunning is again one of the primary qualities of successful Navy SEALs is cunning, the ability to think outside the box, to break rules, right? Because again, back in the days of Draper Kaufman, these guys who were swimming across the beach, sometimes they'd have to swim across the beach to frustrate or sabotage enemy lines. Well, these are 5-man groups with pistols and swim fins, right? I mean,
Hmm.
these if they get caught, they are dead, captured at the best, right? So they had to be cunning in the way that they attacked the enemy. They were surgical in their objective versus kind of in mass, right? So cunning is a huge thing, and I think cunning is a really effective attribute when it comes to drive because it allows you to think about problems that come your way in different ways. And so that's why I talk about cunning. And then finally, narcissism we talked about, but this idea that hey, my desire to stand out and be paid attention to matters, and it's driving me, and there's nothing, that's just the truth. It is. I mean, ask anybody who's made it big, and part of that desire was to stand out.
I love it. What are some things that readers gain when they learn about the 25 different attributes and then work in their own lives to improve on them?
They will gain an understanding about themselves and their performance. I think they will be able to index the things they learned in this book about how they managed through 2020, and by doing that, how they can excel in 2021 because they learned a lot. And I guarantee there were some of the attributes that they didn't have a lot of that they developed the heck out of in 2020. It just made them do it. The environment made them do it, so they can learn about what they developed. So gain an understanding of themselves. Uh, Dissect what is required to achieve their next goal or the objective. That's the kind of the individual. As teams, it allows a team to understand, okay, what is this team's capability in terms of their collection of attributes, and what are our gaps? I mean, what are we missing? Because the best teams are teams that are collection, are kind of a mesh between attributes, right? I talk about others in the book. There's 3 other attributes I talk about because I talk about them because either polarity is good, right? So there's competitiveness or non-competitiveness. both are actually good. If you have a competitive person and a non-competitive person on a team, you're in great shape, right? Because a competitive person is very good when it comes to understanding the rules of the game, right? And they can look at an environment and immediately start to say, okay, these are the rules and here's how to win. Not only win, but crush it, right? The non-competitive person, again, I've never been competitive either. I've always been non-competitive. I've always looked at the pack and be like, what are those people? What else is going on? I don't want to be part of that pack, right? The non-competitive person will see avenues outside the pack, right? And so to have both polarities on a team is actually powerful. So to understand the attributes from respect to a team or business, I think can be very effective. And then just ask yourself, where can I go from here? I think that's the again, understand your own engine and your team's engine, I think is the goal.
Hey, if you like that video, you need to check out this one here, and I'll see you there.
And then finally, the fifth C, besides clarity and care and contribution, and creativity, I would say is capabilities. And this quote that I've heard in different iterations, I'm sure your audience has, it's like we don't rise to the level of other people's expectations as much as we fall to the level of our own training.